morning. I'm excited to get to share the word with you this morning. So, kids went back to school this week, at least for him. Pretty exciting. And if your kids are anything like mine over Christmas break, it did not take very long at all, like probably the first day that they were home, to at some point in the day, maybe they've been up for an hour, to say the two words that all kids will say. Somebody said, "I'm bored. I am so bored. I don't have anything to do. Give me the iPad. Give me the phone. Give me the Xbox. Give me the TV. Give me this. Give me that. I am so bored." Now, have you ever been bored? Like, it's not just a condition that affects kids, but boredom. You're flipping through the TV. You've flipped through all the channels, 3 times before. Oh, maybe there'll be something on this time. No, it's still Martha Stewart, or I don't even know if she's still on, but it's a Pioneer Woman, or it's Dr. Phil. That seems to be what's always on when I turn the TV on. But you go look through the fridge a few times. We don't really look through the fridge because we're hungry. We look through the fridge because we're bored, and we just open it up and look, and maybe something will have spawned in there. Well, that's just me. Or you scroll through your phone, not even looking at anything, but boredom. And I'm convinced that sometimes some of our worst decisions that at the time seem like our best decisions are made out of boredom. Things like this. I asked a group of friends of mine, what are some decisions that you made while bored that they seemed like great ideas at the time, but they turned out to be terrible? And here's what some of them said. Rob, he said, "I bought a pizzeria to help people get job skills. We owned it for 2 years, 32 days, 10 hours, 31 minutes. Not that I was counting." Chad, he said, "I impulse bought a motorcycle without talking to my wife about it." Yeah, I'd get in trouble for that. Eric, he said, "As a kid, being bored, I took the top off of a disposable cigarette lighter. In doing so, I hit the flint and it blew up. It burned off my eyebrows, eyelashes, and hair in front and back of my scalp. Being afraid to tell my parents, I just went to bed instead. The next morning, I forgot what had happened. I sat down for breakfast and everyone stared. When my mom turned around, she let out a huge gasp. I can still see the look on their faces." I think the most trouble I ever got for being bored, I had my friend Luke over at the house, and we were in the barn, and my dad had built a basketball goal up there, and we had a dirt floor, and we played basketball for a while, and then I don't know what possessed me to do this. It's so dusty in this barn, but I got out the push mower. And I started the mower in the barn, and I start running around with it in circles, and there's dust flying everywhere. All of a sudden, my mom comes out there. "Brandon, what in the world are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm mowing the dirt." And it was just... It's one of those things. I started trying to think, like, what are some idiotic things I've done while bored? And that's the one that kind of came to my mind. But sometimes boredom causes us to make bad decisions that seem great at the time. But sometimes boredom is the catalyst that God uses to just throw the top off of our life and do something extraordinary. Take the disciples, for example. We're going to be in Luke 5 this morning. You can turn there. And we'll start in verse 1. But think about the disciples. All of them had a story. All 12 of them. I think of people like Matthew, who's sitting in a tax collector's booth, stealing money from his own people, the Jews, and being hated by the Jews, and day in and day out. Yeah, you got your money, but after a while, you just are probably a little bit bored. Doing the same thing day after day after day. Maybe that's you this morning. Maybe you're bored. Kind of get up every day, go to work, sit at the same desk in the same office, type the same reports, do the same thing, eat lunch at the same time, eat the same thing for lunch every day, go home, clock out, then go home. See your family for a little bit, eat dinner, go to bed, maybe you watch some TV. And you do the same thing the next day after day after day, and you're just bored. It's like, God, there has to be something more than what's going on. So Luke chapter 5, we'll go through this. It says, one day Jesus was standing by the Lake of Gennesaret. That's the Sea of Galilee. The people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats, left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked them to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he'd finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." And when they'd done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees, and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they'd taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. I don't know about you, but when I read this text, I just see people bored. People are bored with the way things are. And you read verse 1, and the people just seem bored to me. They're just following Jesus around. Now, granted, Jesus, it's in the first year of his ministry. He's pretty popular. He's done some miracles. He's taught some things. And people are obsessed with Jesus. He's a little celebrity in the day. And so people are just following him around. And they're listening to what he has to say. And what they've noticed about Jesus is that he teaches about God, yes, but he's not like these other religious leaders at all. He's not like these people at all. He says things with authority. Like the religious leaders, they'll read things and they'll kind of read and they'll tell you what it says. But this guy, he actually interprets it. He actually infuses new meaning into it. We need to listen to this guy because he says things that nobody else says. And so many people are crowding around Jesus this morning that he's got to get into a boat to speak to the crowd. He gets into Simon's boat, and he says, "Simon, hey, push this boat out so that I can speak to the crowd because there's so many people that are in front of him." And so he does that, and that's Jesus for you. Like we think, oh, we gotta have a PowerPoint, everybody's gotta have a Bible, everybody's gotta do this before we can teach. But no, Jesus, man, he's on the water. He just grabs a boat. He goes out. He speaks to the crowd. He uses the natural acoustics of the area, and he speaks to the crowd. These people are bored. They know that he's got something that the religious leaders don't, and they want it, so they listen to him. I wonder if that's why we get so obsessed with celebrities. Because we look at them and we think, man, they've got this life that I don't. I need to follow them. I need to get some of that. Because maybe if I just had some of that, then my life would be a lot better. I don't know. It's a thought. But here's what happens. We're in this series called Encounters over through Easter. And we're looking at different encounters that Jesus has with people and kind of seeing what they all have in common, what happens through them all. And our wish is that sometime this year, maybe it's during the series, maybe it's not, but that you have an actual encounter with Jesus. Not an encounter with the church or a special song or a sermon or whatever, but that you actually sit at the feet of Jesus and you have an encounter that changes the rest of your life. And what you learn in this story is that an encounter with Jesus is going to interrupt your routines. It just does. And I grew up being taught the wrong thing about this story. Maybe you did too. We had like the flannel graph and you got the boat and you got all the fish and everything, which is really cool. But I grew up hearing that this is the first time that Jesus meets Peter, James, John, and Andrew. That he meets them, and because he meets them, and he does the miracle, and he says, "Come follow me," that they just leave everything and they follow him after that, after meeting him one time. That's not true. You can read right before this, and Jesus was in Peter's house, Simon's house, and he healed the guy's mother-in-law. So Peter and Jesus kind of know each other a little bit. This isn't the first time that they meet. He's had a relationship with these people. But I want you to think about these fishermen. I said the people were bored. I think the fishermen were probably pretty bored. I mean, they've been doing it a long time. These are professional fishermen. They've got a business. And after you do something a long time, I don't know about you, but it just gets kind of boring. Can you relate? You get the same routines. These people, they'd fish all night. They'd take care of their catch. they'd wash their nets, they'd hang them out to dry, they'd put the nets away, they'd store the boats, they'd sleep for a little bit, they'd deal with their family, then they'd go out and fish again. The next day they'd do the same thing. Probably 6 days a week, 6 nights a week. Just the same thing after the same thing after the same thing. And after a while, it's just monotony. It's just boredom. It's like, is this all there is to life, or am I going to be doing this until I die? But then Jesus shows up. And he asks Peter, and he asks them to do some things that don't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, it's one thing, Jesus asked to borrow the boat to go out and teach in the water so that he's got somewhere where the crowd isn't all upon him. That's one thing. But then when Jesus is like, after he finishes teaching, he tells Peter, hey, I want you to take the boat and go out to the deep water. Well, that's not where you fish. I want you to go out to the deep water in the middle of the day, and then I want you to put your nets down. The nets that you've been washing, the nets that you've been drying, you've already spent your time cleaning those up, you want to go home and sleep. I want you to do that. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the irony of this is that you've got a carpenter, Jesus, a rabbi, a teacher, telling a professional fisherman how to fish. Like, that's pretty funny. And Peter, I'm sure he kind of looked at him like, look, Jesus, we've been out all night. Like, we haven't caught a thing. But then, just before this in the text, Jesus healed his mother-in-law. So he knows something is special about Jesus. So he said, but because you say so, I'm going to go do that. And so they do that. And because Peter is willing to do something that doesn't make a lot of sense, because Peter's willing to get his routine interrupted, he gets to witness something extraordinary. See, Jesus isn't always going to ask us to do things that make sense. He's not always going to ask us to do things that go along with what everybody thinks we ought to be doing. Because most of what Jesus is going to ask us to do seems completely countercultural. Things like loving our enemies, that makes a lot of sense. I really want to love the person who just punched me in the face. That's great. Or pray for my enemies. That sounds great. I want to spend my time on my knees praying for people who can't stand me. That sounds like a lot of fun, Jesus. Or, I'm going to go take my nets in my boat, even though I fished all night, and we didn't catch a thing, and I'm going to go out to the deep water where I don't catch the fish, and I'm going to throw my nets in. But he does. And he witnesses something so awesome that it probably, I know it surprised all of them. And you got to think about this. They get the fish. They get so many fish that the boat starts sinking. They got to call in their other boat, and then that starts sinking. And I don't know how this works. We talked a little bit about this last week, but Jesus is fully God. He's fully man. Incarnation, he becomes man. Philippians 2, it's clear that he sets aside some of his divinity, some of his godness. I mean, he never ceases being God while he's man. But here in this water, he knows exactly where the fish are going to be. And I don't know if he called the fish there or if he knew the fish were going to be. I don't know how it works. But I know that you got God in the boat here. And Peter recognizes that. And encounters with Jesus, yes, they interrupt your routines, but two, they lead to humility. I mean, what would you have done if you were in the boat? You get Jesus, you get these fish. If he told you to go out and fish, and you'd done it all night, maybe you'd say, no, Jesus, we've done all that. We're going home. We're tired. But then you see that happen. Maybe I just sit and wonder, kind of like, I don't know what just happened, but I don't know if I ate something bad or if I'm really seeing what I think I'm seeing. What would you do? How many of us would do what Peter did? I mean, Peter drops to his knees at Jesus' knees. And he just has this moment of humility. He looks at Jesus and he knows that this isn't just some ordinary carpenter. Like, there is something different about this guy. And what he saw was the holiness of God contrasted with his life. And he just falls at his feet. He realizes he's not supposed to be in the presence of that kind of holiness. And he says, get away from me, Jesus. I'm sinful. I'm not even worthy to be in the same boat with you. Peter's the only one who does that. It doesn't say that the rest of them do that. But he'd encountered Jesus. And when we encounter Jesus, we also encounter our unworthiness to even be in his presence. See, a true encounter with Jesus always leads to the recognition of who he is, but it also leads to the recognition of who we are. And we're not fit to be in his presence. And it's clear Peter doesn't realize his full identity yet. He's not confessed him as the Messiah yet. He's not spent a whole lot of time with him. That comes later. But he realized that he was completely in the presence of holiness. And Peter responds just like Isaiah does. In Isaiah chapter 6, when Isaiah sees a vision of the Lord, and Isaiah sees it in Isaiah 6, chapter 5, he says, "Woe to me, I cried, I'm ruined, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." How would you respond in the presence of Jesus? See, the only proper response is humility. See, we're sinners in the presence of a holy God, and our attitude had better reflect that. Encounters with Jesus interrupt our routines. They should lead to humility. And encounters with Jesus should also lead to encounters with others about Jesus. Peter's afraid. Jesus comforts him. He says, "Hey, it's okay. I know exactly who you are. I know you better than you even know yourself. And I'm going to take you, and I'm going to take these men, and instead of fishing for fish, instead of doing the rest of your life doing that, I'm going to show you how to fish for people. You're going to fish for men. You're going to be fishers of men. And the stakes are even higher." See, Jesus assumes that if he changes our lives, we're not just going to keep it a secret. He assumes that if he does something in our life, we're not just going to keep it to ourselves. He assumes that we're going to talk to other people about it. And in fact, he commands that those who follow him, who claim to follow him, he commands us to actually go out and make disciples, just like we see him doing right here in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. See, I like what Alan talked about earlier with the fig tree. And sometimes I wonder, if Jesus were here today and he was walking along, I wonder how many, church buildings like the fig trees that he would just curse. See, I think sometimes the church building, any church building, and a church service, it's kind of a false picture of how we're doing. We kind of come in here and we sing songs and we're all happy to see each other and we have a good time and we worship God. But is that all we're supposed to be doing? And we leave here thinking, man, that was a great service. That was a great sermon. I really love the worship music this morning. I really love seeing all my friends. Is that all we're supposed to be doing? And I think sometimes it gives us a false reality that we're doing great when maybe we're not. See, our best church service should happen outside of these walls. We should just be coming in here to celebrate what God's doing out there. Our best services should be around the community and around kitchen tables and inside people's homes. And we can have this great service in here and get moved by the music or whatever, and you have this assumption that God's really moving, when in fact that might not be the case. Because if he's moving in here, then he better be moving out there. We have to be careful that we're serving God and we're not just serving our emotions. So they get this catch of fish. They pull their boats on shore. They leave everything and they follow Jesus. I mean, did you hear that? They have the biggest catch of fish of their life, like more fish than they've ever seen. And they just leave it. They quit. I mean, they quit everything that they know because they just found the solution to the boredom and the monotony of their lives. They just found the answer to the question that they didn't even know they were asking. Jesus. See, an encounter with Jesus in that boat changes everything for them. They left their jobs to follow Jesus. And think about this. James and John, they left their father's business. I wonder what Dad had to say about that. It didn't matter what Dad had to say. It didn't matter what Mom had to say. It could have caused family turmoil following Jesus, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was following Jesus. And when you followed Jesus, when you followed a rabbi, you would go where they went. You would do what they did. If they were hungry, you were hungry. If they were homeless, you were homeless. If they were doing good, you were doing good. It kind of became a shadow of your rabbi. And when we say we follow Jesus, it should be assumed that we're going where he did and that we're doing what he did. We're going to some uncomfortable places. Where we're talking to some people who a lot of people don't want anything to do with. A lot of people kind of give us sideways glances when we talk to them or when we look at them. Like, what are you doing talking to them? Well, we're doing what Jesus did. It's not just staying in the safety of these walls. Earlier I mentioned that this wasn't the first time that they met, that they didn't just leave it all the first time that they met Jesus and decided to follow him, and that's important. See, they'd gotten to know Jesus. They listened to him. They didn't just make this rash decision, like, hey, he did a cool miracle, let's go follow him. Let's see some more tricks. No, they got to know him. And even Jesus, you read on through Scripture, he tells people to completely count the cost before they decide to follow him. He's like, don't just follow me because you saw a miracle. Don't just follow me because you like what I say. You better think long and hard before you decide to commit your life to me. It says in Luke chapter 14 and verse 25, it says, large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. It's important to count the cost because when we follow Jesus, there's always a cross. If he had to carry a cross and if he had to die, and we say we follow him, then how can we expect anything different? But it's through death on a cross that we actually find life. So 4 fishermen, on the best career day of their lives, they followed Jesus. And on the other side of that, Jesus is this incredibly popular teacher. We talked about that. All kinds of people want to follow Jesus, crowds everywhere. He could have had the best students around. Man, the who's who of all of the students, the smartest people, the wisest people, he could have had all of those people. He could have had quite the team, but look at who he handpicks. He starts out with 4 fishermen who stink. You can't really be a fisherman if you don't smell like fish. And those aren't people who are on like the top 30, under 30. Those are some kind of losers in the eyes of the world. He picks a tax collector who robs his own people. He picks the weirdest group of people that you could imagine. And he does that on purpose because he wants to show off his wisdom versus ours. He wants to show off he wants to use what we think of weakness to show off his strength. He wants to use people that we think of as hated to show off his love. And that's good news for us. He doesn't pick followers the way that we would. We like to pick the people who are first. He picks the people that are last. That's good news for us, all of us. He stands this morning and he calls us to follow him. He calls you to follow him. He calls me to follow him, not to follow a church, not to follow a pastor or a trend, but to actually follow him. Whether you're a starter or whether you're riding the bench. Whether you can sing great or like me, you can't carry a tune in a bucket. Or so my wife tells me. Big or small or tall or short, whatever you are, he calls you to follow him. And if you're bored this morning, there's no greater news in the world than the creator of the world who stepped down and took on skin to die the death that we should have died. There's no greater news in the world than that. He wants you to follow him. And that when you do, when you actually encounter him, He will change your life in ways that you can't even imagine. Will you pray with me?